My fingers wrapped around the coffee mug so tight I thought the ceramic might crack. My son's voice was barely above a whisper, but in the quiet of that Tuesday morning kitchen, every word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Mom, please don't go to the mountains with Dad this weekend. Please. I remember the exact way the October light came through the window above the sink. The way Tommy stood in the doorway still wearing his dinosaur pajamas, his dark hair sticking up on one side from sleep. He was 10 years old. He had his father's eyes and my stubbornness, and he was looking at me with an expression no 10-year-old should ever have to carry. That was 30 years ago. I'm 63 now. I teach watercolor classes on Saturday mornings at the community center in Asheville, and I grow tomatoes in the backyard. And sometimes my grandchildren visit, and we make pancakes and watch old movies. My life is so quietly ordinary that sometimes I have to remind myself how close I came to not having any of it. I almost dismissed him. That's the part that still keeps me up sometimes. I almost said, "Sweetheart, you're being silly. Go get dressed." I almost poured my coffee and walked away. Instead, I set the mug down on the counter and crouched to his eye level. "What do you mean, baby?" I said. "Why not?" He twisted the hem of his pajama shirt the way he always did when he was scared or nervous. He wouldn't look at me directly. He looked at a spot just past my shoulder. I found something on Dad's old laptop, the one in the basement. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for a game I used to play on it, and I clicked the wrong folder. He finally met my eyes. Mom, Dad has another family. The kitchen seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. My husband Daniel had left for an early showing 40 minutes ago. "Real estate," he always said. "The early clients want properties before anyone else sees them. The early clients need me on site by 7. He'd been doing early showings and late client dinners for the better part of a year. "Sweetheart," I said, very carefully, "I need you to show me exactly what you found." He took my hand and led me downstairs. The old laptop was a gray Lenovo we'd stopped using when Daniel upgraded 2 years prior. It sat on a shelf in the basement between a box of Tommy's old schoolwork and a broken lamp I kept meaning to throw out. Tommy had clearly been using it recently. The charging cable was plugged in and the screen woke up immediately when I touched the trackpad. He navigated without hesitation. He knew exactly where he'd been. He opened a folder inside a folder inside a folder, buried 3 levels deep under a directory named simply Old Tax Files. Nobody opens a folder called Old Tax Files. That was the point. Inside were photographs. Daniel at a backyard barbecue, laughing with his arm around a blonde woman I'd never seen. Daniel at what looked like a birthday party for a small girl, maybe 4 or 5 years old. Daniel sitting at a kitchen table I'd never been in, reading a newspaper, looking completely at home. Daniel holding a newborn in a hospital room. Daniel and the same blonde woman at what looked like a beach, her head on his shoulder, his hand on the curve of what was clearly a pregnant belly. I sat down on the cold basement floor. There were more. Nearly 200 photographs. The most recent ones were dated 3 months ago. The little girl I'd seen at the birthday party was maybe 7 or 8 in the recent ones, which meant these photographs spanned at least 3 years. 3 years of another woman. 3 years of another child. A child who called my husband Daddy. "Mom." Tommy's voice was very small behind me. "There's more." He reached past me and opened a second folder. Documents. I opened the first one. It was a lease agreement for an apartment in Roanoke, Virginia, 45 minutes from our house in Charlottesville. The lease was in Daniel's name. The address was listed as his primary residence. The date on the lease was 18 months ago. And then there was the last document, the one that turned my blood to ice water. It was a life insurance policy. On me. For $2.5 million. Daniel had taken it out 11 months ago. The beneficiary was Daniel Michael Hargrove, my husband. Followed by, in the event of his prior death, a name I didn't recognize. Claire Ashworth. I stared at that name for a long time. Tommy crouched down beside me on the floor. He put his hand on my arm. His small fingers felt very warm against my skin. "There's one more thing I have to tell you," he said. He sounded older than 10. He sounded like someone who had been carrying something very heavy for longer than he should have. "Last Friday night, I came downstairs to get water and Dad was on the phone in his office. The door wasn't all the way shut. I heard him say your name. He said it would look like a hiking accident. He said the trail at the Blue Ridge cabin is too close to the ridge and you were never good with heights anyway. He was right about that. I had been afraid of heights since I was a teenager. A bad fall from a barn roof at my uncle's farm, 30 feet to the frozen ground. I'd broken my arm and my confidence at the same time. I never recovered the second one. Daniel knew. We'd hiked together early in our marriage, and he'd always guided me carefully away from the edges, his hand steady on my elbow, and I'd thought it was love. I'd thought it was him taking care of me. He'd been memorizing my weaknesses for years. I heard him say something about the insurance policy being old enough, Tommy continued. Old enough that it wouldn't look suspicious. He said she'll slip. Everyone will believe it because of how she is on heights. Mom, he said, she'll slip. Like it was nothing. Like ordering a pizza. I pulled my son into my arms on that cold basement floor, and I held him for a long time. He didn't cry. He was too scared to cry. He held on to me like I was already in danger of being taken away. I knew I had two choices. I could call the police right then and have nothing but photographs and a laptop folder and a child's account of an overheard phone call. Daniel would deny it. He'd say it was a coincidence. He'd say Tommy misheard. He'd say the woman was a client, a cousin, a college friend. He had an answer for everything. That was how he'd kept this hidden for 3 years. Or I could get proof. I called my brother Ray before Tommy had finished his breakfast. Ray had spent 8 years in the Army and another 12 working private security, and he had, as he always put it, a very specific set of contacts accumulated through 2 decades of not asking too many questions. He'd never liked Daniel. He'd told me so at my wedding rehearsal dinner, quietly, over bourbon. He said something about how men who are too charming in public are usually running from something in private. I told Ray everything. He was silent for a long time on the other end. Then he said, "How soon can you get here?" By 9 o'clock that morning, I was sitting in Ray's kitchen in Richmond. Tommy was at school. I'd kissed him goodbye and told him everything was going to be okay, and I'd believed it with only about 40% of my heart. The other 60% was terrified and furious in equal measure. Ray had already started pulling threads. By noon, we had the shape of it. Daniel had met Claire Ashworth at a real estate conference in Charlotte 3 years ago. She was a mortgage broker, smart, pretty, early 30s. Their daughter Sadie had been born 2 years ago. Claire believed Daniel worked primarily in Charlottesville Monday through Thursday and came home to Roanoke every weekend. He'd built 2 lives on the same schedule, the same smooth explanations, the same easy charm. "She doesn't know about you," Ray said. "I'd stake my life on it. The texts I pulled show her pushing him for more money, better apartment. Sadie needs this and Sadie needs that. He keeps promising. He doesn't have it. He needs the policy," I said. Ray nodded slowly. $2.5 million solves all his problems. Pays off Claire. Keeps Sadie in the apartment. Maybe even makes him a widower with a story instead of a bigamist with a secret. I thought about Daniel buttering toast that morning before he left, his wedding ring catching the light, asking me if I wanted him to pick up anything from the grocery store. I thought about how I'd kissed him on the cheek and said just milk, and how ordinary it had been, and how he'd nodded and walked out the door already calculating. "When did he start planning this?" I asked. Ray looked at me carefully. "Probably around when Claire got pregnant. Maybe before. So the entire last year. The insurance policy. The cabin trip he'd been quietly suggesting for months. We need to get away, just the 2 of us. We used to love that cabin. Remember when we went up there for our anniversary? That narrow trail along the northern ridge, the one that drops off sharply on the left side. He'd mentioned that trail twice in the last month. The view is spectacular up there, he'd said. We should do the ridge walk this time. He'd been building the stage set for almost a year. "I want to go," I told Ray. "I want to go to that cabin, and I want to catch him doing it." Ray put both hands flat on the table. "Margaret." "With cameras," I said. "With police." I spoke to his detective contact, a woman named Sheila Pratt, who worked violent crimes for the Charlottesville PD and who had, according to Ray, an impeccable record and an intense personal hatred of domestic violence cases that got dismissed on technicality. If I go wearing a wire, with cameras already in place, with police positioned on that trail, I said, then we have everything. We have the attempt on tape. We have his voice. We have premeditation. Ray looked at me for a long time. "You're 60% sure about this," he said. I thought about those photographs on the laptop. I thought about Claire Ashworth, who had no idea she was in love with a man who was married. I thought about little Sadie, who was 2 years old and didn't know her father was a monster. I thought about Tommy, 10 years old on a cold basement floor, carrying a secret that no child should ever have to carry. "I'm 100% sure," I said. "If I don't stop him here, he tries again. Maybe he succeeds the next time. Tommy grows up thinking his mother died in a hiking accident, never knowing his father planned it. I will not let that be my son's story." Ray exhaled. "Okay," he said. "Okay, let's plan." We spent 2 days building the operation. Detective Pratt got the warrant. She and Ray drove up to the Blue Ridge cabin on Thursday afternoon while Daniel was at work, and they installed 4 weatherproof cameras covering the trail access, the ridge overlook, and the narrow section where the drop was sharpest. They positioned themselves in the tree cover to the east of the ridge with a clear line of sight. The wire they gave me was a thin strip of film that adhered directly to my skin, nearly invisible under a long-sleeve shirt. I went home Thursday evening and made dinner and watched television with Daniel and said nothing. I watched him the way you watch someone you thought you knew, looking for the seams where the performance began. He was very good. He laughed at a commercial. He complained about a difficult client in Staunton. He refilled my wine without being asked and touched the back of my neck when he passed behind my chair, and I did not flinch. Friday morning, he made the suggestion over breakfast. Fresh scrambled eggs, orange juice, very domestic. "I booked the cabin for tomorrow through Sunday," he said. "I know it's last minute, but I had a cancellation and I thought, when was the last time we had real time alone? Just the 2 of us. Mountains. No phones." I looked up from my coffee. "What about Tommy?" "Already handled," he said. "I called your sister. She said he can stay with her and the kids this weekend. He'll love it. He'd arranged my son's absence. He'd cleared the schedule. He'd built every wall around this weekend for months, and now here he was, presenting it as spontaneous generosity." "That sounds wonderful," I said. "I could use the fresh air." He smiled and something moved behind his eyes that I can only describe as relief. He left Tommy at my sister's house Saturday morning. Tommy held me for a long time in the driveway. He pressed his face into my shoulder and his whole body was rigid. I pulled back and held his face in my hands and looked at him directly. "I'm coming back," I told him. "I promise you, I'm coming back." He nodded very carefully. I could see him trying to believe me. The drive to the cabin was 2 hours through the Shenandoah Valley, blue mountains rising on either side of us, the October foliage at its absolute peak. Daniel was in excellent spirits. He pointed out color in the ridgeline, talked about a property he was considering listing in the valley, held my hand across the center console. His wedding ring was warm. He told a story about a funny client interaction that made me actually laugh, and for half a second I forgot what the day was for. Then I remembered. The cabin sat at the end of a gravel road 12 miles from the nearest town. We'd bought it 5 years into our marriage as a weekend retreat. It was remote in the way that only felt charming if you weren't afraid of what that remoteness meant. No neighbors, no cell service except for a single spot on the east porch. Closest hospital 40 minutes away. He had chosen this place very deliberately. That first evening, he cooked dinner. He was a good cook, and he knew it, and he made the garlic pasta I'd always loved, and he opened a bottle of good red wine, and he was attentive in the careful way of someone playing a role they've rehearsed. I thought about the tea. In the original plan, we'd accounted for the possibility that he might drug me the night before, the way the laptop documents had hinted he'd done to someone before. I had not touched the wine he poured me, only pretended to sip. If he noticed, he didn't show it. We sat on the porch after dinner and watched the stars appear one by one over the ridge. It was beautiful in the way that things are sometimes achingly beautiful when you know they're almost the last thing you'll see. "I'm glad we did this," he said. "Me too," I said. "I love you," he said. "I need you to know that." I've heard that sentence since from men who meant it. In Daniel's mouth that night it meant something else entirely. It meant I'm sorry, or maybe it meant nothing at all. I've turned it over many times in the 30 years since and I still don't know which. "I love you too," I said. And I hated how easily it still came out. Sunday morning was cold and clear, the kind of October day in Virginia that looks like a painting. He made coffee and suggested the ridge walk after breakfast, casual as discussing the weather. "The Northern Trail," he said. "The views are better up there, and the foliage is at its absolute best this weekend." "I know," I said. "You've mentioned that trail before." Something flickered across his face. Very brief. Gone in an instant. "I know," he said easily. "It's just genuinely spectacular up there." I changed into hiking boots and a fleece over my long-sleeve shirt, the wire invisible beneath both layers. Ray and Detective Pratt were already in position. I knew this. I had to trust this. My hands were perfectly steady, which surprised me. The fear had burned away sometime before dawn, and what was left underneath it was something cooler and much harder. The trail wound uphill through dense pine and birch for the first quarter-mile, then broke into open, rocky terrain as it followed the spine of the ridge. The views were, genuinely, spectacular. Valley below, on both sides, the Blue Ridge rolling away in every direction, the sky enormous and blue above us. Under other circumstances, it would have been one of those days you remember for decades for the right reasons. He walked slightly ahead of me on the narrow sections. I noticed this. We reached the overlook about 40 minutes into the hike. A wide, flat rock jutting over the edge, a 200-foot drop into the valley below. A National Forest Service sign was posted 20 feet back from the edge. "Caution. Unstable terrain. Do not approach cliff edge." He walked past the sign. "Come see this," he called back to me. "You can see all the way to the Massanutten from up here." My legs were shaking. I wasn't acting. "I'm not sure," I called back. "The edge makes me nervous." He turned and looked at me. His expression was patient and warm, and absolutely calibrated. "It's solid rock," he said. "I've stood here a dozen times. You're perfectly safe. Come on, the view is worth it." He extended his hand toward me. There it was. The exact moment. Detective Pratt had briefed me on this. "Don't go to the edge. You don't need to go to the edge. Let him come back toward you or keep the distance." I took one step forward, then two. He watched me with a stillness that I recognized, in that moment, for what it was. Not patience, not concern, something else, something calculating and waiting. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small silver flask. He took a pull from it and offered it to me. "Bourbon," he said. "Warms you up out here." I'd been briefed on this too. "No," I said. "Too early for me." He smiled and put the flask away. Then he took 2 steps toward me and the smile changed. I saw it happen. I watched his face recalculate. Something shifted behind his eyes, the same shift I'd seen at breakfast on Saturday, and he reached for my arm, and I stepped back hard and fast and felt my heel catch the edge of a smaller rock behind me, and I went sideways instead of backward, falling onto the flat stone surface of the trail, scraping my palm raw on the rock. I heard him above me, very quiet. "Damn," he said. "Not like that." He was talking to himself. He was revising. He crouched beside me, his face a performance of concern. "Are you okay, sweetheart? I was reaching for you and you startled." He helped me up, hands gentle on my arm, his eyes doing the calculation I could see plainly now. I was on solid ground, 10 feet from the edge. He needed me at the edge. "It's okay," I said. "I'm clumsy." "Let me show you the view," he said. "I'll hold you. You won't fall." And there it was, clean and terrible in its simplicity. "I'll hold you." I looked at him. 30 years ago this October, and I can still see every detail of his face in that moment. The gray at his temples, the crease beside his left eye that I had once found charming, the gold wedding band on his hand, the same hand that had just tried to send me over a cliff. "I know about Claire," I said. The color left his face so fast it was like watching a light turn off. "I know about Sadie," I said. "I know about the apartment in Roanoke. I know about the policy." His mouth opened. No sound came out. "I know you came up here to push me off that ridge," I said, "and I want you to know that everything you've said in the last 2 days has been recorded, and there are cameras on this trail. And Detective Pratt and my brother are standing in those trees right now." He looked at the tree line. He was a smart man. He'd always been a smart man. He could hear the truth in what I was saying, and the calculation in his eyes shifted one last time, from predator to prey, and in that second he made the worst decision he could have made. He grabbed my arm and yanked me toward the edge. I screamed. Not from fear, although I was afraid. I screamed so the wire would pick up every second clearly. I dug my heels in. I am not a large woman, but I have always been stronger than I look, and I was fighting for my life, and I have read since then that human beings are capable of extraordinary strength in those moments, and I believe it because I threw my weight sideways and went down on my knees instead of forward, and his grip broke. Ray came out of the trees at a dead run. He was 42 years old and ex-Army, and he covered that distance in about 4 seconds flat. Detective Pratt was right behind him. Daniel released me and turned and did the only thing left to him, which was to stand very still, with his hands open, while my brother got between us, and the detective put her hand on her firearm and said his name in a voice that had no warmth in it whatsoever. I sat on the rocky trail with my scraped palm pressed to my chest and watched them put my husband in handcuffs. He didn't look at me again. He looked at the trees, at the valley below, at Detective Pratt's badge. He looked everywhere except at me. The wire had caught everything. His words at the cliff edge. "Not like that. I'll hold you." His attempt to pull me forward. The cameras showed the grab, the yank toward the overlook, the exact angle and intent of it. Claire's texts on his phone, found during booking, showed months of pressure about money and his repeated assurances that the situation would be resolved soon. Text from 3 weeks earlier, "Things are almost taken care of, baby. Just need this weekend." Claire Ashworth, when Charlottesville police contacted her that afternoon, fell apart completely. She'd had no idea. She'd believed every word. She had a 2-year-old daughter, and she'd believed a man who was capable of standing on a mountain trail and calculating the best angle to send his wife over a cliff. She was no villain. She was another person he'd decided to use. They charged him with attempted murder and insurance fraud. The DA later added charges related to the bigamous marriage and fraudulent identity documents. His lawyer tried to argue I'd misunderstood his movements at the cliff edge. The cameras made that argument very difficult to maintain. Tommy testified at the preliminary hearing about what he'd overheard in the office. He stood up in front of a courtroom in his school blazer and answered every question in a clear, steady voice and did not look at his father once. He was 10 years old. He was the bravest person I have ever known. The jury was out for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. 18 years, with the possibility of parole after 12. Tommy and I moved to Asheville the following spring. Fresh start, new mountains, different ones this time, ones I could look at without thinking about that October morning. I went back to my maiden name. I took a job teaching art at a middle school, and I stayed in that job for 22 years, and I was good at it. My son grew up to be a good man. He's 40 now and lives in Raleigh and coaches his son's Little League on weekends. He named his daughter Margaret. "Not after me," he said when I teased him about it. After himself, since his full name is Thomas, Margaret's last name Hargrove, and he dropped the Hargrove before he turned 11. He said Margaret was just a good name that deserved to survive. I cried when he told me that, and I am not a person who cries easily. We talk about that October sometimes. Not often, and not without intention, but we talk about it honestly because I decided early on that Tommy had earned the right to all of it. He'd saved my life. He deserved to understand exactly what he'd saved and why it mattered, and that his courage at 10 years old had rewritten both our futures. "Did you ever regret not just going to the police right away?" he asked me last Thanksgiving. Instead of setting up the whole thing at the cabin, we were sitting on my porch watching his kids chase fireflies in the yard. The Blue Ridge was a dark line on the horizon, the same mountains, softer now, 30 years away. I thought about it the way I always think about it, carefully and completely. "No," I said, because without that evidence, without the wire and the cameras and him grabbing my arm on that trail, there was a real chance he walks away. Charming men with good lawyers walk away from things all the time when there's no physical evidence. And if he walks away, he tries again. Maybe somewhere I can't plan for. Maybe somewhere Tommy can't protect me. My son nodded. He was quiet for a moment. "I was so scared that whole weekend," he said. "I knew what you were doing. I knew why. I just kept thinking, what if Ray doesn't get there in time?" I reached over and put my hand on his arm. "He got there in time," I said, "because you found that folder. Because you came to me in the kitchen instead of deciding you were wrong or that I wouldn't believe you. You were 10 years old and you chose to tell me the truth even though it was the hardest thing you'd ever done. That's not nothing. That's everything." Daniel was released on parole 2 years ago. He lives in Bristol now, not allowed within 500 miles of Tommy or me. I got a notification when he was released, a victim notification form with a case number and a phone number for a victim's advocate. I filed it and went back to my tomatoes. Claire Ashworth moved to Portland with Sadie after the trial. We've never spoken. I think about her sometimes. Two women who believed the same man for the same reasons and whose lives were quietly detonated by the same set of lies. I don't feel anger toward her. I feel something more like sorrow. The hiking boots I wore on that trail are still in my closet. I don't know why I kept them. Maybe because throwing them away would have meant giving that day a kind of power I wasn't willing to give it. They sit on the shelf next to my gardening clogs and I walk past them every morning and they're just shoes. I hike these days, actually. Easier trails, no ridge walks, nothing that puts me above a drop. But I hike. I learned that refusing to go outside because of what happened on a mountain is letting it take something it doesn't deserve to take. My grandchildren think hiking is boring. They'll learn. If you're hearing this and something in your life doesn't add up, I want to say one thing clearly, not gently, not with caveats, just clearly. Trust what doesn't add up. Inconsistencies in someone's story are not accidents. People who love you do not have folders inside folders inside folders on old laptops. People who love you do not take out insurance policies and then casually suggest the exact kind of accident that policy would cover. And if a child in your life comes to you with something they've heard or seen or found, something that scares them, something that doesn't make sense, please hear them all the way out before you decide how to respond. Children do not have the social conditioning that teaches adults to explain away danger. They see what they see. They hear what they hear. They are often the clearest eyes in the room. My son was 10 years old on a cold basement floor with a gray laptop, shaking, and he chose to believe that I would listen to him. He chose to trust me with the most frightening thing he'd ever found. If I had dismissed him, if I had told him he'd misunderstood, if I had walked away back to my coffee that Tuesday morning the way I almost did, you would not be hearing my voice right now. Instead, I crouched down to his level, and I listened. It cost me my marriage and my certainty about what love looks like and a couple of years of real grief for the life I thought I had. It gave me 30 more years of everything else. 30 more years of Tommy, of my grandchildren in the backyard, of watercolor class on Saturday mornings, of tomatoes in August, of coffee on this porch watching the light change on the same mountains where my husband tried to kill me, and my brother came running out of the trees and I sat on cold stone with my bleeding palm pressed to my chest and understood, fully and finally, that I was going to be okay. I am more than okay. I am exactly where I am supposed to be. And if you are somewhere you are not supposed to be, if something feels wrong, if someone in your life is keeping folders inside folders, and you keep finding things that don't add up no matter how much you want them to, listen to that feeling. It is trying to save your life the same way my son saved mine. Trust it. Get help. Get out. You are stronger than they believe you to be. You are smarter than they've planned for. And you deserve a porch and tomatoes and the ordinary, extraordinary miracle of a morning where nothing is trying to hurt you. Trust yourself. Trust the people who love you enough to be scared for you. Trust that voice. It's usually right.